So in this video, I want to address a certain occurrence of cognitive dissonance which is extremely prevalent among individuals identifying with the pro-choice movement. And in so doing, this video will also illustrate a serious logical inconsistency between much of the rhetoric and many of the arguments employed by the pro-choice movement in order to make its case, and the position held by the vast majority of pro-choice persons that men should be legally obliged to support their offspring, either by participating directly in the child's upbringing or via financial contributions such as child support. Now, I will briefly note that more and more we live in a world where child support is a reality for men as well as for women, and that it's no longer something which is only applicable to the male gender. Women are being made to pay child support the same as their male counterparts. The relevant piece of information here is that people are being forced to make child support payments. Because if you analyze it, a court order demanding child support payments be made is essentially a legal mechanism forcing somebody, a man or a woman, to support the child, the offspring, the dependent that he or she has helped to create. So it's a societal tool for making certain that children are being supported, that offspring are being cared for, that people are living up to their parental responsibilities, and that maternal as well as paternal obligations are being met. And this is inherently inconsistent with the language as well as the arguments employed by the pro-choice movement. Because if you look at the cases they make, if you look at the rhetoric you use, you will find that more often than not, the pro-choice movement attempts to defend abortion not by stating that it's a good thing, but by excusing the mother of her maternal obligations and parental responsibilities. So they're not so much pro-abortion arguments as pro-choice arguments, as anti-parental responsibility arguments. And I'm sure the term anti-parental responsibility will annoy a few people, but if you're honest, it's completely synonymous with the term pro-choice. Because whenever somebody identifies as pro-choice, this individual is essentially expressing the position that a woman should have the right to choose whether or not she is going to support this child. So it's stating that the position should be optional, not obligatory, that it should be a personal decision and not a parental responsibility. It is arguing against holding the mother responsible as such. So being pro-choice is essentially opposing laws which enforce parental responsibility during the prenatal stages of life, at least so far as it pertains to the mother. The logical inconsistency here emerges whenever the pro-choice movement conveniently neglects to apply its rationale to the postnatal stages of life, even though these arguments lend themselves just as well to a case against postnatal parental responsibility as they do to a case against prenatal parental responsibility. So, for example, one typical argument in defense of abortion states that because the mother might not be ready for parenthood physically, psychologically, socially, economically, or in some other fashion, you cannot hold her responsible as a parent. You can't tell somebody to support a child when they're not ready to do so at this time in their life. The problem with this is that it is just as applicable to, say, a father who has impregnated a woman but doesn't want to pay child support. He might not be ready for fatherhood. So if you can say that you can't hold somebody responsible as a parent until they are prepared to support a child, then any man who states he's not prepared to pay child support should not be forced to do so. Similarly, a woman may be prepared for motherhood at the time that she gave birth to a child, but 3 or 4 years later, maybe she gets injured in the workplace and she loses her source of income. She's psychologically traumatized. Her parents disown her for being a deadbeat mom. She loses all of her social connections and she faces all of these burdens which make her no longer prepared to face parenthood. Well, can we say that because this mother is not currently ready to be a mother at this point in her life, that she can shirk the responsibilities associated with having a child? No, not at all. Yet the argument used in defense of abortion tells us otherwise. It tells us that she can just abandon her responsibility, because the logic behind the pro-choice movement isn't a pro-abortion argument, it's an anti-parental responsibility argument, which applies just as well to the postnatal stages of the child's life as to the prenatal stages. Another example of this irrational rhetoric and this inconsistent logic emerges whenever pro-choice individuals attempt to demonize prenatal rights activists by claiming that the pro-life movement movement intends to punish women for having had sex, and that it intends to do so with parental responsibilities. Because if telling a woman that she has to be responsible for her prenatal child is tantamount to punishing her for having had sex, it logically follows that telling her that she must be responsible for her postnatal child is chastising her for having given birth. But that's not the case. Demanding parental responsibility is not something that we do because we want to punish the parents. It's something that we do because we want to protect the children. That's why when, for example, a court is deciding whether or not to make somebody pay child support, the interest of the child is all that we look at. We don't consider the parents. The parents are a non-factor. We look at what's best for the child. If we're in a custody battle and we're trying to decide which parent gets the child, we don't consider parental rights. We consider the child's rights. Now, just to make sure this is well-rounded, let's look at one final illustration of this inconsistent application of pro-choice rhetoric and argumentation. Many pro-choice people complain that women who have obtained abortions are made to feel guilty, that they're told they have to apologize, they have to seek forgiveness. And that's completely true. This is something which happens on a daily basis. But with that being said, their argument here is that a woman should be able to escape her maternal responsibilities without facing social condemnation for having done so. Yet if a man escapes his paternal responsibilities, they call him a deadbeat dad. They criticize him. They say that this is a plague upon society and that we have to take steps in order to remedy this curse, in order to make certain that fathers are playing a role in the family, whether or not they're prepared for that obligation at that particular time in their life. So again, we're seeing a sexist inequality, and we're seeing an illogical application of pro-choice argument and rhetoric. All of this being said, nothing in this video has led us to the conclusion that abortion should be illegal. Neither has this video told us that making somebody pay child support payments is unconstitutional, or that forcing somebody to support their offspring is a violation of somebody's rights. The purpose of this video is merely to illustrate an inconsistent and therefore an illogical application of pro-choice arguments and rhetoric. Now, with this being said, it is actually possible to resolve this inconsistency. It is possible to argue that a parent of type A, say a pregnant mother, should have a choice, whereas a parent of type B, say the mother of a born child or a father, should have a responsibility. Because you can always explain why this is the case simply by providing a simple reason. And many pro-choice philosophers have attempted to do so. They say that the mother should be allowed to obtain an abortion because the prenatal human specimen is not yet a person. Therefore, her obligations have not yet begun. But that a father should still be forced to pay child support if the child is born, because the child is then a person, and therefore the father's responsibilities have begun. And the same can be said when you're looking at the pregnant mother versus the mother of a born child. The problem here is that, first off, it does nothing to resolve the sexist inequality that's created when you allow women to escape their maternal responsibilities while providing no mechanism for men to do the same. Furthermore, it illustrates a need to focus upon the status of a fetus in order to make the position of the pro-choice movement logically consistent. And the pro-choice movement tries very, very hard not to look at the fetus. It tries to shine the spotlight upon the mother and to exclude the fetus. So it attempts to address the issue in an arena of ignorance by keeping information pertaining to the status of the prenatal human specimen out of question and out of the debate. And we can't do this. We have to discuss the status of the fetus. We have to determine whether or not it is entitled to the rights usually associated with personhood in order to decide whether or not abortion should be legal. And so long as the pro-choice movement neglects to do so, we see that their argumentation is inconsistently applied and therefore illogical.